I've always loved horror. Horror movies, horror stories, all of it. I've also always had a deep imagination, making horror more livid and even more terrifying. I live in a two-story house with large windows, but that's not really important. What is important is that the second story consists of a long hallway, with my parents' bedroom as the very first room, my sister the second, and mine at the end. The bathroom is at a right angle from my bedroom, meaning that when I want to use the bathroom, I have to walk into the hall and take a left. Right across from my room is the office. We all call it the office because my dad used to use it as one, though it really is more of a storage room now. Stored in the office is an old futon, my sister's old mattress that my parents haven't got rid of, and a bunch of new mirrors that my family wanted to hang up in the house eventually. The office doesn't have any working lights because my parents keep forgetting to get it fixed. One night, right after we had a nice large dinner and a scary movie, we went upstairs to bed. In my nightly routine, I go to my parents' room with them to hang out and talk with them for about 10 minutes before I go to my room and sleep. I hung out and spoke with them, talked about school, about how rough pre-algebra was, and the like. We spoke until my younger sister came into the room, asking if she could sleep with my parents because she was scared after the film. They agreed and made room for her by pushing me away. They all settled and I announced that I was going to my room because I wasn't scared. I was just trying to talk myself out of admitting that I was a little scared too. I marched down the hall and completed my nightly routine of brushing my teeth, putting on my pajamas, and staring into the office for a minute, and then climbing into bed as slowly as possible to prevent the bed from creaking, which unsettled me for some reason. I set my alarm clock to wake me up at 6 a.m, just when the sun would be rising. I had a habit of waking up at exactly dawn. Anyway, I tucked myself under the comforter and faced the ceiling. I only lay on my back for a few seconds. When I have the urge to change, I then roll to face the bookshelf to my right across from my bed. And when I shift, the rustling of the blanket barely disguises the sound of the door creaking in the hall. I freeze and lock in the half-rotated position, my ears strained to hear if another creak will follow. When I realize my heart is beginning to pick up speed, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just the floorboard settling, or the heat coming on and making a noise. Maybe Mum and Dad got up. Half of my brain was thinking all these things, but the other half was busy with making darker thoughts. Someone's in the house. Could it be a ghost? I jumped out so badly when I heard another creak, sounding less like an opening door and more like a footstep. A heavy footstep. I forced myself to look calmly up in the direction of the office. My mother always told me to listen to my gut, and it's telling me it's coming from there. The shadows in the dark hall make the office door look much more like a gaping black hole. I lean back in my bed, pulling the sheets over me further. God, I'm such a wimp. As I'm thinking, another footstep startles me, followed by another door creak. Mum? Dad? Greta? I whisper quietly, expecting one of them to step into the room and say goodnight. But instead, my ears continue to ring from the perpetual silence. I don't know why I did it, either to impress myself or to end the unknowing fear gnawing at me. I sat up abruptly and whispered harshly, "Get the hell away." I prepared myself for a scolding from either my mom or my dad for cursing, but got no reply. I lay back down and pull the covers over me again. I keep reasoning with myself, but it's too late for that, and my over-imagination self-kicks into action, making everything worse. All of the shadows cast around my room seemed to look more humanoid, and every whistle from outside seemed to sound like loud breathing. I kept willing myself to get out of bed and go to my parents' room, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I somehow managed to fall asleep at 1:23 a.m. My alarm clock awoke me. I snoozed it, remembering vaguely the events of last night. Feeling sweaty and gross, I decided to take a shower. And although I turned the water to very hot, the water came out freezing. After a few moments of listening to the quiet water running, I felt like I was being watched. I pull back the curtain and peek out. There's no one. And finally, when I couldn't stand the shower anymore, I climbed out and dried it off. After getting dressed, I heard my father announce that he was going to the store with Greta. My mother and I didn't want to go, so they left. In my room, I sat at my computer watching videos on YouTube. My mother told me she was going for a short walk, part of her daily hike. She works on getting fit, so she's usually out walking for an hour at a time. "Okay," I called down to her. She calls back up at me, telling me the rules of being alone. Don't answer the door, and don't go outside, and to go to the neighbours if I'm in trouble. I hear her open the door, close, lock it, and leave. I relax once more, and click on another video. My desk is facing the wall, with my back facing the doorway, and the empty hall beyond that, and the office beyond that, when suddenly that feeling of being watched hits me again, and I turn in time to see something dart out my peripheral vision. I whip around, heart racing again. Man, I overreact so much. I sit staring at the office for what feels like forever, without really thinking. I suddenly stand and start walking towards the office door. Hand on the cold doorknob. I open the door and inhale the cold, dusty air. It smelled like cardboard. I stepped forward, eyes moving immediately to the dark corner of the room. Hidden behind the mattress I mentioned earlier, I take another step. I heard breathing. Ragged, heavy breathing. I freaked out so badly, stumbled back from the corner. The darkness seemed to reach out to me and send chills into my body, almost as if it were taking control. The breathing got louder, not coming from the corner anymore, but seemingly from all around me. I fell backwards out of the office and closed the door, ran down the stairs and went outside. I walked down the road until I spotted my mum, and I stayed with her for the rest of the walk. I never told my family, because I don't want them thinking that I was making it up for attention. I will never forget about it though, and whether you believe or not that it happened, I'm so glad that we moved from that house 1 year later. This story is something that happened to me and my grandma when I was around 6 or 7. For context, I am a girl, and at the time, I was living in a city that was somewhat small, but is politically important, so it always had an airport. My aunt was flying in, and as she lived in another city for ages, we were very excited to welcome her at the airport. We made our way out to the gate that people came out of after picking up their luggage. I remember being very chatty whilst waiting, and at some point, my grandma grabbed my hand really hard and gave me a look that just meant, "Shut up." I thought I had said something wrong, but after a while, I realized she was trying to listen to the people that were standing next to us. They seemed to be fighting a lot, and my grandma has always been very gossipy. I looked over at them, and they were an old man and a very pregnant woman that were discussing something which didn't interest 7-year-old me. So I ignored it. And now some things get fuzzy in my memory. So I will recount to you what my grandmother told me. I remember the old man screaming something to the effect of, "There he is, I'm going to get him," over and over, until this man leaves departures and emerges through the sliding glass doors. Then I just remember that people all around started screaming, and my grandma threw me on the ground and laid on top of me. I heard noises like fireworks and screams, and feeling suffocated both by my grandma and some sort of weird smell, and also by how hot it was underneath her. So I was feeling really bad and started screaming myself. I tried to push her off, and for a moment raised my head and saw a lot of red come close to my face on the ground, and lots of people laying down, with hands on their heads. Everything smelled really bad and hot. I don't really know how to describe it. At this point, my grandma pushed my head forcefully down to the ground and whispered, "Stop and play dead now," in the most serious voice I had ever heard from her. I didn't understand what was happening before that, and was quite angry with my grandma for being so forceful. But as she said this, I began to understand that it was serious, and I got quiet really fast while trying not to cry. At some point, she got off me and carried me behind a large pillar. I remember feeling very shaky in the legs, as if I had no strength. But there was a police officer who told me everything was going to be alright. There were other people there who looked scared too, and we just sat down in silence for some time, while we heard police talking and the old man crying and screaming very loudly. Then it got really quiet, and I remember being taken to a room where I had to say what I knew to more officers for a while until we could go. When they took me there, an officer used his hand to cover my eyes in the way, and I remember feeling just angry and tired of being handled around. I tried to take his hands off me and saw just for a moment the pregnant woman lying on her back, and this image remains in my head since that day. For the details that my grandma told me later on. She told me the truth only a few years ago, and the time this took place, she just explained to me that a very bad man did bad things and was arrested, and that I shouldn't worry about it. But as she explained recently, what happened was the old man was the woman's father, and apparently she was very young and got pregnant by this guy, Dick, who then just ran away and abandoned her. He was coming back because she had recently been in touch and he had reconsidered about being a father. Except when her father found out about this, he was very angry and wanted to enact revenge on Dick for leaving in the first place. My grandma said she learnt this on the news later, but in the airport, She heard the father talking about how Dick ruined her life and had to pay, and how he wasn't going to let anyone treat her like that, and she kept telling him that she loved this guy and that he had come around and not to do anything. I should also add that maybe abortions aren't legal here, and that the only way to get one is either paying a lot of cash for someone to do it illegally, or getting sketchy drugs from sketchy people, which can result in a lot of bad stuff. As you may have guessed, her father had a gun, and as Dick came out of the glass door with his luggage, he whipped it out, and that's when people started screaming, and my grandma throws me on the ground, and also when everyone else got on the ground too. Except he didn't just kill that guy. Apparently, he was either too emotional or had never done it before and couldn't aim right, and hurt some other people too who took grazing bullets or got shot in non-fatal places. While this was happening, the woman keeps screaming that she loves her baby and that her dad managed to aim right as she threw herself in the way. Both her, Dick, and the baby were killed instantly. My grandma said that this happened really fast, and the police showed up as he shot them. This is when the old guy calms down for a bit, or at least isn't trying to shoot anyone anymore. So there's a lot of police trying to get the gun from him, and people just start to get up and hide. And this is when we go and hide behind the pillar. It takes a few minutes, but he just lets go of the gun, probably sad that he just killed his daughter and grandchild, and the police take him away. I think it took the police some time to show up, because at the time it was a very small airport, and low in crime and such. My grandma said the whole thing happened in about 20 minutes, but to me, it felt like ages. As I only talked to my grandma recently about this, I hadn't realized how close we had been to the old man and his daughter, and that when I saw red just a few inches from my nose, I was no doubt looking at the blood of someone else. I'm forever grateful that she protected me so well, and I hadn't even realized the situation we were in until recently. Oh, and about my aunt. As soon as the shooting started, people inside the sliding glass doors were told to go back to the corridor, so my aunt was completely safe when we managed to get her. Have you ever been so desperate for pain relief that you would try anything? I know someone will understand. For the others, I cannot truly express the horrifying things that constant pain does to one's mental and physical ability. My first encounter with this type of pain was back in early 2016. I was working as a company representative. Basically, my job was to arrive at grocery stores, get samples of the brand products, and then stand at a little table to let people sample and encourage sales. I really enjoyed this job. It was easy, as I very much like to have conversations, and it was almost natural to me. I had been very good at getting sales, being a decently attractive female with red-hot dyed hair got me just the right amount of attention. My job required hours of standing in one spot. It could get boring if the store was not getting much business. It was a day like this one where my story began. I had felt a lot of pain the day prior in my back. I thought it must have been the shoes I was wearing or something, and I spent the night trying to find a comfortable shoe in uniform guidelines, hoping it would ease. This day, it got worse. My back was hurting so badly, I still couldn't sit and fought back tears for hours. I took pain medication when I had a chance, and it did nothing. I didn't even notice a change. I did my best blank face and smile to hide the fact that I was having this much trouble. When I got off work, I called my husband to take me to the emergency room, and this is where my years of physical horror truly began. Long story short, hours in the ER showed nothing wrong. I was sent home with narcotics and suggested to go to a pain center. My boss would not let me even try to work, as it was in my interest to figure out my back problems. It was hurting the bank account, as we were averaging $2,500 a month, and it was now $1,000 less. I was desperate to get an answer and help so that I could return to work. The doctors at the pain center told me the problem was the sciatic nerve being pinched, and I just had tennis arm on the other side. I really had no option but to believe that he was right, because he suggested the epidural injection into the sciatic nerve. For those of you who don't know, the sciatic nerve runs down from your back down to your foot on the left side of your body. If it's pinched, pain shoots up all the way down the left side of your body, and in some cases your arms and shoulders. Back nerves are a strange thing, as they are so close to the spine. I really wanted relief, but I could barely get around and would lay in bed all day, slightly high from pain drugs. I had to use the auto carts to get through a store and got dirty looks constantly, because a healthy looking 22-year-old with no visible injuries is doing that for funsies clearly. Anyway, I set up my appointment, and when my mum got there, I immediately started having very bad anxiety. The nurse was explaining how it's a 16 gauge needle and how long it is, how it will be put in. I didn't catch anything past 16 gauge and over 5 inches long, and she noticed and got me a fairly high dose of anxiety meds that dissolved so that it would calm me down. I told her I didn't want to see the needle and dreaded walking in. When they called me in, I almost fell over. When they called me in, I almost fell over when I stood. I was extremely high and drowsy. I didn't do much. I was still terrified. They had me lay face down, feet on the floor, and proceeded. At first I thought, okay, this will be over quickly. It just kept getting deeper and deeper in my body. Then I was told something along the lines of, "This will make a sound, but don't worry, it's completely fine." Then I heard it. The most horrible crunch sound I've ever heard, and it was from the needle going through cartilage in my back. I was so disturbed. I tried to jump off the table screaming, which resulted in lots of them screaming, "No, no, no," and then my body being slammed down. The doctor somehow kept the needle from shifting. If it had, I could very well have been paralyzed. I just laid there shaking with tears falling silently from my eyes as I heard the horrible crunch again. The doctor almost had it and told the nurse to double the anxiety meds next time. Then I felt the horrible pain of the nerve being hit by the needle, and the freezing cold of the medication all the way down to my feet. Then the pain was almost gone. and all I could feel was the long piercing through my lower back. They told me to be calm about it. People get these on their lunch breaks. It's no big deal. But that was no comfort to me. I was haunted by that sound. I've had nightmares for weeks, and I still shudder when my mind tries to remember it. The good news, I've never had to go through that again. The bad news, it wasn't the nerve that was the problem. It was the first manifestation of fibromyalgia. It's much worse now, and I'm pretty sure most people with this much pain would think that they are dying. I don't remember the feeling of not having pain, and I really don't know how I'm alive with this much pain. All I know is I now have an almost PTSD response to any type of needle. Luckily, nothing that large has been needed for my treatment. If you ever get to the point of being so desperate and your doctor rushes to a conclusion ignoring your questions, please get a second opinion. This event made a slowly developing condition down spiral very quickly. I don't know how people have done this on their lunch break, but I'm glad I will never need to again. I am a 20-year-old female, and this took place back in March. I was 19 years old at the time. It was the end of spring break, and I was returning to Texas from California. I had just spent my vacation with my sister who lives in San Francisco. Every college kid counts down the days until spring break, and my vacation had gone rather well. However, I was slightly okay with returning to the essays and research papers, because I missed my friends, my bed, and my cat. Maybe not in that particular order. I was flying alone, something I don't like doing for multiple reasons, and had only one layover in Dallas. I don't like traveling alone because I've had some bad experiences, and I happen to look a lot younger than 20. Most often people say I look 13 or 14 at most, and I've always hated that about myself. But I'm told I'll be grateful when I'm older. As of now, it's just immensely frustrating. The last time I was on a plane by myself, the attendant thought I was an unaccompanied minor named Taylor. I quickly assured her I was not the minor in question. The time before that, I was asked to move away from the emergency exit because I had to be at least 16 to sit there, which obviously I was. Anyway, my boyfriend was picking me up from the airport, and I was excited. I wore the pink members only jacket he had bought for me and tried to look my best, which is difficult when traveling. When the plane arrived in Dallas, we had some really terrible weather and the turbulence was scary, but no matter. Soon I would be on another flight to Houston. I took the train around to the C terminal and made my way to my gate, only to find out that due to torrential rain and lightning, my flight had been cancelled. I was crushed, but determined, so I took my ticket to be exchanged for a later flight. It seemed many others had the same grievance and were open to do the same. As I was standing in line, a friendly-looking older man came up to stand behind me. "Are you alone?" he asked. Everyone seemed to be conversing with one another, complaining about the weather and pondering their options to get home. It didn't seem like a big deal, because strangers always seem to connect in situations like this one. We were all frustrated, and I also felt safe in the crowded airport. So I answered him truthfully and continued to wait in line. The man behind the counter said I was in luck, that there were only 2 seats left on another flight to Houston, and that I could make it if I hurried. I rushed to board the train to Terminal A to catch my new flight, and upon reaching the gate, was faced with the same situation. This new flight was cancelled too. The man from before had followed me to the gate and was in the same boat. I exchanged my ticket for an even later flight and resolutely marched myself to the new gate, only to be told the same as before. Literally, 2 or 3 more times on top, because I really didn't want to give up and had no other options. The man shadowed me during the entire ordeal, but I didn't really find it strange. We were just 2 individuals stranded in an airport after all. The last gate I went to, I noticed that he was still following me. He walked over to me and begins to chat about that awful luck that we were having. Someone is eavesdropping nearby and suggests that I rent a car. I politely tell them that I am not old enough, and the man smiles and said to me, "Well, I'm old enough to rent a car. How about this? I'll rent one, you can sleep and I'll drive." I look at him, and the way he is staring at me legitimately scares me. I finally begin to feel that something is off, and I respond, no, but thank you. I'm going pretty far." His smile falters for a moment, then he suggests that he buys me some food. I am starving, and I am tempted. I hesitate for a moment, but then I remember a book I'd read about a girl who was stolen from the airport after a man drugs her coffee. This gives me the strength to deny my grumbling stomach and decline him again. He follows me. I don't know why. He's already told me that he's gonna rent a car and leave. He points to a Mexican restaurant and says, "Ooh, how about this place?" He has this strange look on his face and is standing far too close to me. I shake my head and say, "I told you I'm not really hungry," which is a lie, even though I can smell something delicious, and I almost give in. But my face does not betray my hunger, and I keep my pace. Okay, what about burgers then?" He looks a bit annoyed. This guy does not give up easily. I ignore him, and this causes him to glare at me angrily, and then just walk away. I breathe a sigh of relief and I call my sister to tell her about him. Not in a catty sort of way, just a "wow, that guy was persistent" kind of thing. I settle into a chair to think about my options. I feel pretty alone and worried. My latest ticket has me leaving around midnight, and it was about 9 p.m. At that point, I had been in the airport since 5 p.m. If this last flight didn't work out, I had no clue what I would do. I had no money for a hotel, and didn't fancy sleeping in a chair. The last time I fell asleep in public, which was on a train in France, a lady attempted to steal my backpack, but that is another story. I look up about 30 minutes later to see the very same man from before walking towards me. I tuck my legs up in my chair nervously. I used to work as a wound care technician, meaning I assisted with semi-sterile surgical debridements, applied negative pressure wound therapy, otherwise known as wound vacs, and helped apply wound dressing, assisted in other surgical procedures, and educated patients on how to help heal in their advanced wound care. In 3 years, I came across plenty of colourful characters. A woman who had severely infected toes because she was injecting them with heroin. A wheelchair-bound man with a severely undermining stage 4. A wheelchair-bound man with a severely undermining stage 4 pressure ulcer who stopped coming to his appointments because he was non-compliant with the doctor's suggestions, and one very other interesting fellow. This story is about Jake. Jake used to be a full-time truck driver. One night, according to him, he got out of his rig at a truck stop and fell straight into a huge pothole, snapping a couple of his vertebrae. He had back surgery to fix the fractures, which ended his career and put him in a wheelchair after a post-surgical infection. This then led to wounds on his lower legs that he no longer felt, leading to bilateral amputations of his lower legs. Due to the massive amount of opiates he was then prescribed, out of guilt, pity, or maybe a sense of duty, Jake became one of the worst addicts I've ever met. Over a span of 2 years, we admitted him to long-term acute care hospitals, one after another, trying to heal the progressively growing wound to his hips, sacrum, and buttocks. At each one, he was kicked out for using more than his prescribed medication. When I first qualified as a nurse about 7 years ago, my first job was working in the operating theatre of a large old hospital. I was doing a run of night shifts, and there we ran just one emergency theatre overnight, and you would often be able to have long breaks to get some sleep. The department had a large basement full of winding corridors and rooms where we kept the endless equipment needed for all the surgeries. There was also a very large staff room in the basement, full of comfortable couches. It was my last shift, and I was feeling a bit tired, so I headed down there for my break. I don't usually sleep on nights, so this was the first time in there at night. All the other nurses said that they were going to stay on the main floor and sleep in the recovery room, which I thought was odd. I settled down, but couldn't sleep, as usual. So I was texting the girl I was seeing at the time, facing the back of the couch, when I suddenly felt a very angry slap on the back. I screamed out loud, because I didn't think anyone was in there in the room with me. I jumped up, slammed on the light, and it was empty. I grabbed my stuff and ran out the room, through the winding dark corridors, up the stairs, and out into the sanctuary of the recovery room. I must have looked as white as a sheet. Someone asked if I was okay, and I said what happened, and swore it was true. There was no way I was asleep. An older nurse smiles and said, "You met him, didn't you?" She explains how years ago, a not very nice man who did the inventory had a heart attack and passed away down there, alone in the staff room. Ever since then, people kept experiencing angry events, like the sensations of being smothered, pushed or slapped, if lying down there at night. That was why most staff didn't sleep down there at night. I never went back there in the staff room for the entire time I worked there, unless it was in a day with a colleague. injecting opiates straight into his IV, and just being totally non-compliant. Being an outpatient clinic, we were loath to refuse care to anyone who needed it. So over and over again, we would wound vac, put dressings on him with silver or honey, and the damned kitchen sink too on this man's ever-growing need and deepening wounds. One of the very last times I saw him was the first time I smelled rotting flesh. His entire backside was rotting. I have a strong stomach. In fact, this guy's wounds made me gag. We ended up sending him to the ER. Jake got a full surgical debridement under anesthesia. When he returned to outpatient care, his entire hip joints, sacrum, and the bottom of his pelvis were open to the air. I literally could see his femoral artery pulse as we lay there while dressing his wounds. I mean, wound. One big wound. I left that job not too much later for unrelated reasons, and I heard that Jake died. Through sepsis or an overdose. But what I do know is what a corpse that had been sitting in a wheelchair for weeks smells like. It's just something you'll never forget. Jake had a living girlfriend that brought him to his appointments. We never met her. I always wanted to ask her questions like, "Don't you smell that?" And "Just how big of a piece of shit are you?" Or the one I really wanted to know, how big was the life insurance policy that you are sole beneficiary of? It must be pretty damn big to watch your boyfriend rot away in his chair without saying a word about it. This past summer, my younger sister and I went to visit family and friends out of state. My sister at the time was 16, and I myself was 18. Just for some reference, my sister and I look very alike, but a lot of the time, I get told that she looks way older than me, like she would be in her 20s. You see, she's got a good 5 inches on me. She took all the height genes, and both of us are very loud and obnoxious, especially when we're together. Okay, we arrive at the local airport, and my parents, of course, freak out and worry, and then send us off. We went to our local airport, which is pretty small in comparison to the size of the city that we live in. My sister and I find our gate, and we were there at least an hour before. My sister and I find our gate and realize that we will be waiting an additional hour because our plane had to make an emergency landing. Yay! Because some passenger was feeling a bit sick or something, which obviously delayed our process. Anyway, we were sitting around and were completely by ourselves. Now the airport really isn't big. Once you get through security, you make a left to where some gates are, or a right to where the other gates are. And they have a few shops and restaurants in between the gates. We were at the closest gate possible to where all the restaurants and stuff were located. And there had to be at least 3 other gates down past us. So we were at A, and there was B and C and D at the end. We were sitting alone. Our flight really didn't have many people, and we were extremely early anyway. And there were at least 100 other vacant seats. I'm sitting on the floor in order to charge my phone, whilst watching Netflix, and my sister is doing exactly the same thing. When all of a sudden, a weird older guy just decided to sit right across from us. Mind you, there were at least 100 other seats that were completely empty. But no, this guy had to come and sit right next to us. What a flipping genius. Anyway, he was really skinny, and he reminded me a lot of the murderer character from the Lovely Bones film. So me and my sister are doing this small chit-chat in between watching our shows, and we keep hearing the announcements about our flight, and both keep cracking jokes and making comments as we always do, and just messing around. Common for two teenage girls. Almost every single thing we say, this guy laughs at. I mean, I know when we're together we're funny, but he would joke at even the most inappropriate things. For example, I said, "Would you like some water?" And he just started laughing hysterically. Another time I said, "Wow, this is taking a while." Not even remotely funny. And he bursts into a fit of laughter. Okay, at this point I'm concerned. This guy is probably a little bit out of sorts. But I'm not going to say anything. That is when I get very alert, and my paranoia starts eating away at me, especially since I always listen to these scary stories. I'm always aware of my situation, so I keep my eye on this dude as he kept watching my sister and I most of the time, especially with his eyes on my sister. Like I said before, I'm on my phone watching Netflix when all of a sudden my sister sends me a text. "I think this guy is taking pictures of me." I didn't even say anything back, as I was a little shocked. I replied, "Are you sure?" She said yes. And that's when my full crazy sister mode was enabled. You see, my sister and I are extremely close. I would give my life defending her, as I'm sure she would for me. And I don't put up with any shit. Neither does she. She's feisty. But I could tell that she was scared. As soon as I look up to give this guy a piece of my mind, he just got up and left. He looked like he was about to shit a ton of bricks. I turned to my sister, asking her what happened, and she just said that she was on her phone and looked up to see him with his phone tilted right at her. I said maybe he wasn't taking pictures, but she said that she could just tell based on the way he was acting. He was acting in the same way a teenage girl does when she's trying to secretly take a picture of a cute boy and isn't being discreet about it. After talking to her about it, I was angry. Like, who even are you taking pictures of a 16-year-old? I got up and walked down the gates to the direction the guy went in. And I shit you not, I walked up our section of gates at least 5 times, and he was nowhere. Mind you, I didn't enter the men's room. I texted my mum, and she freaked out, telling me to go to the flight attendants and speak to a security guard. But I let it go, considering the fact that I couldn't find and point out the guy myself, which now I realise was a mistake. He would have obviously been in the security footage, and obviously would have had to go on a flight. So more likely than not, they would have been able to check his phone, validate the claim, and then we would have been able to go on from there. But I wasn't thinking straight. The weirdest part besides him taking pictures was that when me and my sister boarded the flight, the man did not. He didn't return to the gate and wasn't on our flight at all. So he was just sitting right across from us for no reason other than to be a weirdo. When I was on my early teenage years, my parents told me to look out for my grandmother, since her helper got injured when she accidentally slipped going down a ramp. Since it was my grandmother personally who asked my parents for me to look out for her at her house, I gladly agreed. As I remember, my grandmother was on her 90th year by that time. It was okay for me, since our house is just next door. Before going to school in the morning, I would prepare her breakfast. Right after going to school, I would go directly to my grandma's house and assist her with whatever she needed. Make her a cup of coffee, fetch her slippers, guide her going to the bathroom, and even watch TV with her. Every night, I would tuck her in bed. I slept every night inside her room, just by the sofa near her bed. There's a half wall separating us. It remained half covered for me to see if she was still doing okay. We share one electric fan that turns simultaneously to both of us. Though there is an air conditioning unit in her room, and we only use it if it's burning hot outside. All was going well, and we enjoyed accompanying each other for the past few months. And then, strange things started to happen. One night, while lying by the couch inside my grandma's room, I heard the door creak. I can see clearly from where I was lying that the door had been opened. I thought that maybe it was just not closed, and the window blew it, which sometimes happens. I decided to stand up to the door and close it, and I looked outside to see if anyone may have pushed it open, but there was no one there. I closed the door and went back to bed. After a few minutes later, it opened once more. I again got up, thinking I might have just not closed it tight, or someone is awake playing a prank on me. I immediately looked outside and saw someone running up the next floor giggling. I quickly thought it was my cousin, because his room was upstairs and we do prank each other. With a bit of frustration, I shouted at him, "Dang it, Mel, stop playing around, you'll wake up Lola." Afterwards, I closed and locked both locks of the door, so that he wouldn't be able to repeat it. I was irritated, and decided to lie down and pick up my phone. I messaged my aunt to tell her that my cousin shouldn't be doing this at this time of night, and that it could wake Grandma up. I decided to play games on my phone in order for me to fall asleep, and after a few minutes, my eyes are ready to close when my phone beeped. It was a message from my aunt, and it read, "Hi Mac, Mel is not home from school. They're finishing up their dance practice. Maybe it was Mike who you saw." I had goosebumps. That couldn't be Mike. I knew Mike wasn't home yet. He told me. After realizing that, I heard a sound. The rattling sound came from the door, as if someone were trying to open it. Click. I heard the sound of the first door handle being unlocked, and then a click from the other. I was very sure the sound of the second door lock, and then the door slowly swung open. From where I was lying, I could clearly see the door slowly open, and when the door was fully open, I heard a giggling sound and saw a shadow cast from the light outside. A little kid standing just by the door, and at that moment, I saw it move as it was slowly walking inside the room. I was freaking out and was absolutely starting to panic. I didn't know what to do and quickly covered my face with the blanket. I heard the sound getting louder and louder as it was getting close to me. Next thing I knew, I woke up at our house with a high fever and couldn't speak. When I got better, my mom told me that my cousin was knocking by the door that morning, but I wasn't answering. My grandma was the one who hurriedly opened the door and told my cousin that I was shaking and had a high fever. They tried to talk to me, but I wasn't speaking, so my cousin decided to lift and carry me back to the house to get treated. I don't recall any of that happening. I didn't tell them what I saw that night, and thought they might think I just had a bad dream. But it was very real. 2 days after getting better, I returned back to my grandma's house after school. She asked me to prepare a meal for her, and a hot chocolate because she was feeling hungry. I went to the kitchen and prepared it, and she asked me if I could take it to her room because her knees were hurting, and it was difficult for her to get to the kitchen. I agreed, and went back to the kitchen to bring the meal to her. As she gave me the chocolate, she said, "Mac, can you also give that little kid some chocolate? She's been standing there all day now." I felt a chill over my body as she pointed to the door where she claimed the little kid was. I turned around and no one was there. I tell her that no one's there, but she kept on insisting and pointing that there was a little kid standing in the door. After that, I decided to tell my parents what happened when I got a high fever and what just happened. They weren't at all surprised of what I told them. They told me that sometimes at night they see by the kitchen window a little kid running around as if it were playing, and they'd even hear it giggle. They told me that they never let me know about the little ghost girl because they were afraid that I wouldn't do it. A few weeks later, they got someone round to bless the house, but after that, I started alternating turns with my brother because the ghost girl was still around. And pretended to play on my phone. "Hey, still here?" he asks. He seemed to have cooled down. I just stare at him, and he clears his throat and tries again. "So I was thinking you should come and stay at my aunt's house with me for the night. That's where I'm staying tonight. It would be no problem. You just don't want to be in this airport all night, all alone." I shake my head. "No, I'm fine." Then I turn my attention back to my phone. I didn't even make eye contact. I felt really uncomfortable, and he tries to convince me, and I have to say no firmly several more times. He looks angry, really angry. His hands are clenched, and his smile is obviously fake. It looks as if he will shatter his teeth if he clenches his jaw any tighter. I wonder to myself why he hasn't left the airport yet. Then I notice his luggage is no longer with him. He was rolling it behind him, and now he isn't. Where would he have put it if he hadn't just left it? And so much time had passed. Why is he back here? As I'm thinking all of this, he is just standing there, staring at me. After what feels like forever, he storms off again. So I feel anxious because of him. So anxious, in fact, that I grabbed my things and moved to a different gate to wait. My phone was quickly depleting in its charge, and I didn't want to be without it. So I charge it and plug it into the outlet in the floor. I curled up in the aisle between the chairs to wait. My sister called about an hour later, and I was talking to her, telling her how creepy the dark weather outside looked. When I see him, again, walking around glancing here and there, obviously in search of me. I hunched down even further, but my pink jacket put me like a beacon. He locked eyes with me, and I looked down. My sister said to stay on the phone, so I did. "Well, there you are," he said, not even acknowledging that I am in the middle of a phone call. I continue talking to my sister. When it becomes apparent that he isn't leaving, and doesn't care that I am on the phone, I finally look up. "So you're still here? Look, you need to come with me. You can stay at my grandparents' tonight. They would love to have you. They wouldn't mind me bringing you at all. Just come with me." I got chills. I don't know why, but something in his eyes told me that he was lying. Lying through those shiny white teeth of his. "You said you were staying with your aunt." His face dropped. It went from cool and collected to something else. Not even anger this time, and not defeat either. Almost like amusement. Something like the cat that ate the canary. He shrugs his shoulders like, "I tried." But we both recognized that he was caught in his lie. The entire time my sister was saying, "Hello, hello," over the phone repeatedly. But I was sort of shocked at how indifferent he was catching me. I go back to my conversation and he says, "If you change your mind," and lets the trail of thought off while walking away backwards, eyes still on me. I call my boyfriend after and tell him about this exchange, and he tells me to find a security guard. I look around for one, but couldn't find one. It was creepy, because I've never seen an airport so deserted. I end up just deciding to move again, and lay down between two different aisles out of view. A boy my age walks by and asks why I'm laying on the floor, and I respond a little aggressively, "Because I want to." He laughs and puts his hands up, the unspoken sign for, "Whoa, take it easy, got a badass over here." I apologize for my gruffness and tell him that a man was making me nervous. He jokingly said he'll protect me, and because he seems harmless and I mention my boyfriend, I converse with him for a while. And he tells me he saw me and wondered why the blonde girl was looking so sad. A little while later, I am thankful I did not brush off this stranger, because I see the man again walking around. We made eye contact, but he did not attempt to approach me, because I was no longer alone. Maybe he was just some middle-aged man trying to get a girlfriend or something. But scaring someone isn't the way to do it. Even if he meant me absolutely no harm, he was too aggressive and angry. Of course, all of this is on the more optimistic side, whereas realistically, and through his lies, I am of the persuasion that his intentions were far more dubious. And if my kindness wouldn't have faltered, and I would have gone with him, as stupid as that may have been, who knows, I may not even have been around to tell this story. I am currently 22, and this happened when I was 10ish. I had a cell phone at the time, but only because my parents travelled for their work, so I stayed with my grandparents while my parents were on the road. My dad was working a job in Austin, but my mum was home with me. I had a break in school, spring break or Christmas, I can't remember. So my mum and I decided to fly down to Austin to see him. My mum is a smoker, and me being 10, she didn't want me to be in the cigar room in the airport, which was basically a glass box full of smoke. So we leave our gate and head down that way. Thankfully, there's a bookstore about 10 feet from the cigar room, which also has mostly glass windows. So my mum sends me to the bookstore and sits close to the door of the cigar room so that she can see me. Before we parted ways, my mum told me to send her a text message saying, "I really want this book if I get hinky vibes from anyone." Well, I'm a reader, so I think I'll look for a while until my mum is ready to get me. There probably won't be any issue. After about 5 minutes of being in the bookstore, I notice a guy walk in. I really only remember his grey suit and black dress shoes. I notice his shoes come over by where I am to the thriller section. So I move away to another section, where he promptly follows me again. I assumed it was just coincidence, since I was still looking at more mature books, and move over a few feet to another section, where they have books on racks in the middle of the floor, rather than on shelves on the wall. The guy moves over to the same rack I'm at, but to the other side. My freakometer was going off like crazy, which is rarely wrong. So I do one last thing to test my theory of this guy, and I walk over to the little kids section, like the Hungry Caterpillar type books, and the guy follows me again. I am sufficiently freaked out, so I go back to the thriller section, which is the closest to the checkout. I pick up random books and text my mum. I really want this book. Not 2 seconds later, I smell my mum's perfume and hear her say, "Oh good, you found something." We promptly pay and leave. Once we were away from the store, I told my mum what happened, and she told me that she had seen the guy follow me across the store twice, and immediately walked over because her freakometer was off the charts. She hadn't even gotten my message yet because she was already walking over. Before we go back to our gate, we stop at the ladies' room, and I notice the bookstore guy coming down that hall, and silently point it out to my mum, who went on high alert. After the ladies' room, we head to our gate, where we see bookstore guy sitting 2 seats down from our luggage. So my mum sat down right next to me on the plane entrance and grabbed our stuff. After we boarded the plane, the bookstore guy is only a couple of rows away from us, but we can't really move because it's a plane. Finally, we have a layover midway between Nashville and Austin. I didn't notice the rest of this, but my mum did. The guy got off right behind us and followed us to our next gate. My mum was just pissed at this point and ready to throw down with this guy, but won't because I'm with her. We verify where our gate is and our next plane's ETA and take off to the smoking area, another glass box filled with smoke, where she brought me in with her and smoked the fastest cigarette ever. Apparently, the guy had followed across the airport to the cigar room and just stood outside waiting. We stopped in a gift shop so I could get my dad a gift and grab a drink, and he followed us there too. Finally, my mum has had more than enough, but isn't going to confront him personally because he hasn't done anything or engaged us in any serious way. So, we get back to our gate, where my mum tells the lady by the plane entrance what's been going on since Nashville. She calls security, and these 2 huge security guards come down to our gate and start talking to my mum, who says very loudly and pointing, "That's the man following us since we arrived at the airport in Nashville. He's making us very uncomfortable." After telling them the full story, after hearing my mum be loud and seeing her point directly at him, bookstore guy takes off running. So security call for backup and follow him. And 2 minutes later, we boarded our plane to Austin without the creepy guy from the bookstore. This is my cautionary tale. Please, don't make the same mistake that I made. I was 22 years old, lonely and desperate. And when we're desperate, we don't always see things clearly now, do we? We make stupid decisions and convince ourselves that we deserve anything as long as we're in a relationship. There are far worse things than being single. I found her on Facebook through that suggested friends column. She was 38 years old, and I found her attractive at the time, and interestingly, no longer do. I messaged her, and she responded enthusiastically, and we set up a date. So this is how the first date went down. She immediately told her long, sad story of a traumatic childhood, multiple abusive partners, running away from home, substance abuse, and the fact that nobody understood or respected her. Immediately infuriated with me, insisting that she was head over heels in love and that I was the one. So I went back to her apartment, and I have to say, it was disgusting. I don't know if any of you listening have seen Friends, but there's this one episode where Ross has this beautiful girlfriend, but her apartment looks like they'd taken 8 different trash cans and set it off as a bomb. That is the only comparison I can make. It was a disgusting apartment, piled with garbage. The refrigerator was filled with rotten food, filthy dishes overflowing the sink. She told me she'd been unemployed for a long time and was often let go of jobs because nobody seemed to understand her. I admit it, I was an idiot. My nurturing side took over, and I figured I could help her get back on her feet. People, this is not how you start a healthy relationship. No matter how much you care about someone, a successful romantic partner isn't possible until both partners are generally stable and happy with themselves. A boyfriend and girlfriend is not a professional therapist, housekeeper, or career counselor. She almost never said thank you, never seemed to notice how much work I put into picking up after her, cooking dinner, and trying to cheer her up. She would randomly burst into tears and sob over how miserable her life was, but refused to see a therapist, and insisted that all of them were manipulative people who were just in for it for the money. She texted me just minutes after I left her apartment, always wanting to know where I was, what I was doing, and why I couldn't be with her. I was never at peace. To make matters worse, she didn't just not like, but despised each and every member of my family and every friend I had. Said that I had been a spoilt child and that I needed to learn discipline. Because she was older, she needed to help me grow up and wanted me to distance myself from my loved ones because they were all selfish and prideful and didn't respect her. Terrifying mood swings that became increasingly common and intense. Gaslighting, lies, and manipulation. Towards the end, she began taking long weekend trips to a town about 20 minutes away. I learnt that she was there to see the sermons of a pastor who was helping her get back on her feet, and really wanted me to come and meet him. Turned out the man was a raving lunatic, insisted that Barack Obama had obtained angel DNA and was using it to build an army of invincible soldiers, not to mention being obsessed with the impending rapture. Despised Arabs, Jews, African Americans, pretty much everyone who wasn't a white American to be honest, and was surrounded by a harem of young women who lived in his large home with him. I have no idea why I stayed with her so long. It was almost 3 years. Again, desperation and low self-esteem will do that to you. The final straw was when she had a meltdown at my cousin's wedding in front of our entire family. This occurred 2 states away, so we all had to drive back home with her. She screamed at me so loudly for so long that it looked like blood was coming out of her eyes. She then smashed a huge handful of blueberries into my chest. As soon as I started packing up to leave, she gave me the whole speech about how nobody else would ever love me and that we were soulmates. I noped my way out of there in quick cold turkey. I reconnected with friends, spent lots of time with my family, and rediscovered my true identity, and met the love of my life a few months later. Apparently, she now tells people that I sexually assaulted her. About 20 students, myself included, from my university did a study abroad program in France last summer. We were spending a week in Paris before going to the town where the university was located. Most of the group got a group flight deal to Paris through the university. Others flew separately. The only requirement was that we had to be in Paris by the day we had to leave to go to our university. Most of us had arrived by the third day into our Paris trip, except my friend Amanda. Naturally, we were all worried about her because her phone wasn't working. She had to update us from Facebook whenever she could get free Wi-Fi, which wasn't very often. Her flight had been delayed 6 times already. Another day passed, and still nothing from Amanda. We were all freaking out at this point, since her phone wasn't working, and we had no way of getting in contact with her. So, the 5th day rolls around, still nothing. We all had a scheduled bike tour of the city that morning, and a boat ride on the river that afternoon, so we didn't return to the hotel until about 7 that evening. When I got in, Amanda was asleep in our room, as we were assigned roommates. Of course, I woke her up and asked her where the hell she'd been. She told me that when she finally got to the airport, she was exhausted and broke. She had multiple layovers and had basically spent all her on-hand cash on food, plus her bank card wasn't working. For those of you unfamiliar with Charles de Gaulle Airport, it is massive. Unless you have a map or understand French completely, you will most certainly get lost. So she gets there, lost, broke, tired, hungry, and carrying 3 big-ass bags sitting inside the terminal. She said this good-looking guy walked up to her and started speaking to her in perfect English, which to her was a huge relief. "You look tired, madam. Do you need a taxi to your hotel?" This was the first red flag. What taxi driver gets out of his cab and walks into the airport to find a rider? Not thinking, and naturally being absolutely finished, she says, "Oh yes, thank you. I am so exhausted." He smiles at her and grabs one of her heavier bags and tells her to follow him. She does, and he leads her to this elevator. Red flag number 2. She was already on street level from where all the taxis depart. She gets inside and hits the button for the basement level. He gets on the phone before the elevator opens and starts speaking in French, which she couldn't really understand because it was slang, and she starts freaking out when the doors open. It was the service deck, meant for employees of the airport, not for passengers parking or taxi pickup. It was damp and dark, and as she said, something literally out of a horror movie. The guy gets out of the elevator first and turns to her smiling. "Allons-y," he says, which translates to "let's go." She takes a few more steps and sees in the far corner of the deck the trunk of this green unmarked van with no license plate and a huge ugly ass Middle Eastern guy step out of the driver's seat. At this point, she realizes she's in trouble, but she doesn't want to alert the smiling guy that she's about to get out of there. There's no one in sight, so screaming would be useless, but the lift door is still open. So She quickly placed one of her bags in the middle of the lift entrance and told the smiley guy that she still needed her wallet that was in the bag he was carrying. He looks at her sternly for a minute, but walks over to her and hands her the bag. She told me she pushed him down to the ground with the weight of the bag and got into the elevator as fast as she could. He got up and was bounding after her. She said was as she was going back up to street level. She got to the taxi pickup lane and started bawling. A police officer approached, told the king ring, and more approaching women were more trusting. I am a final year nurse student with loads of messed up stories. So I started on my night shift, and a patient turned and stated that he was going to die tonight, and dying that night with the light on, and you could see shadows dancing around his bed, when no one else could walk in that bay. The second story. I had a patient who needed to be tubed and taken up to ITU in the end. But a couple of hours before that, he had a delirious phase. He kept saying that he wasn't the same, and that he just wanted her to go away, and that he was going to visit her when he could get out of bed. At the same time, she was in the same hospital a floor below him, for a different reason. Turned out, she had died 2 days before that, while he was in surgery. On my third occasion, I nursed a patient who had come back from surgery with necrotic, and they were going to have to take his leg off the next day. Delicious. He was very confused overnight, but the next morning his wife came in, and he was a lot more with it. He told everyone that he just wanted to die, and that he didn't want any treatment. He said that he would die at 4:30 that afternoon, because he could then finally relax. We later found out that that was the time he used to get in from work and relax in front of the television. He died at 4:33 that afternoon. Cue family crying. And a couple of days later, I had to go down to the bowels of the hospital to collect that patient with the leg also walking around. This fourth occasion, it was the first time I saw a dead body, just like in the movies. They can spring back open. Cue me washing this person's chest after having closed the eyes, to turn around to see him staring at me because his eyes had reopened. I screamed like a little girl, and everyone came rushing in. On this fifth occasion, I got called overnight to a patient's house. When we arrived, we found a paramedic crew there because the patient was vomiting fresh blood. They ended up leaving because he was dying, and there was a DNAR in place, so legally they couldn't do anything. We stayed and watched him, and comforted the brother and watched him as he died, vomiting more blood and shitting himself constantly. All in all, it took him about an hour and a half to die from liver cancer due to alcoholism, and it was very uncomfortable and undignified. But as no one had informed his brother about funeral arrangements and body pickup, he had no one to call to collect his dead brother, and we had to leave a grieving brother with his last relative's lifeless body in the next room until a funeral parlor opened 3 hours later just to sort it out. I have another story. While which the buzzer liked to go off on its own, but patients used to avoid that bathroom, saying that they saw things in there. I didn't think anything of it until I went in there to answer the buzzer. There was no one there, and the door locked itself behind me. Pretty hard to do, seeing as the door locks only work from the inside, and you have to call the maintenance man to unlock it from the outside, seeing as he is the only one with a key. My mother used to work housekeeping at a nursing home. She would often take my sister and I to go visit some of her co-workers or the old folks. One of my great aunts also lived there too, so we would visit her as well. But she is not involved in this story. I was maybe 5 or 6, and my sister was 7 or 8. This nursing home was always incredibly dark, despite having huge skylights and floor-to-ceiling windows in every wing. Even from a young age, I knew this was a place of death. From the decrepit frail bodies gathering around the wood-panelled television, showing Lawrence Welk Returns, to the black enamel tree of life that they hung in the wall of the lobby, where every little bronze leaf was engraved with the name of a patient who died there, and the overwhelming smell of urine and sickness. Regardless, my mother is an upbeat and chipper person who loves old people. Even now in her 60s, she doesn't consider herself an old person and loves to volunteer with the elderly. So, in spite of the aura of decay coming from her workplace, she thought it was a wonderful place to show off her children. So we'd visit her along with my dad on her lunch hour during her weekend shifts, and also were forced to go to Mass with her on Sundays, as it was a Catholic facility. Afterward, we'd mill around on her break before she went back to work. Anyway, one day she took us down one of the wings of the facility to greet one of her co-workers. The two of them chatted, my sister hanging with my mother, while I just amused myself by wandering. Everything was completely normal, except for the woman in the room next to us. I didn't look in the room, but I could hear a woman shouting, "I'm in pain," over and over again. Her voice echoing like the wail of a cat, mixed with the voice box of a doll who needed its batteries changed. I asked my mother, "Shouldn't we do something about her?" My mother replied with, "No, she does that all the time, 24 hours a day." So, that was the day I learnt that oftentimes stroke or dementia patients can have almost tics, where they repeat certain words or phrases due to their conditions. Cut to about 10 years later, I'm working dietary at the sister facility to this nursing home, an independent and assisted living facility. Our two facilities were connected by a wing, so staff could travel between the two, as well as patients if they were able. When I worked there, I made the trip many times to the other facility's kitchen. It just so happens that this was the same wing where the shouting woman used to live, but I didn't remember at the time. I walked through the wing and heard a distant, "I'm in pain," repeat a few times before it trailed off. The facility has a policy that all patients must keep their door open, so I poked my head into a few rooms where I thought the sound was coming from, but it was empty. No patients currently living in it at the time. Beds were made with no decorations on the wall. Nothing. Confused, I walked out and met immediately with a nurse. "Oh, hey, Janice. I thought I heard someone shouting on this wing while I was walking to the kitchen." "You did," she replied. She pointed to the lights next to the door, and the call light was on. I didn't trip it or anything. I wasn't even near it whilst I was in the room. She explained, "Occasionally, people will hear a woman shout, 'I'm in pain,' and the call light will go off, so we have to go in and reset it. It happens every couple of weeks." The first incident happened when I was 5. I have an excellent long-term memory. It is photographic. I was in an old town in Massachusetts, Milford, an old apartment built in the 1800s, the year 1998. My mother, a hairdresser, was reading the newspaper sometime in the afternoon before going to work, wearing her black scrub-like material at our basic 4-person dinner table. In the kitchen, one can see the entrance to the bathroom, with its bright light radiating through the bathroom as a result of its blue subway tiles. No doubt a throwback to the last century. I was next to my mother at the table, talking about when we were leaving to be dropped off at my aunt's house down the road. I had a sense to look at the bathroom door, and in the doorway of the bathroom, I see a man, over 6 foot, young with shoulder-length hair, Civil War-looking uniform, and everything. He's just there. I'm afraid, yet not afraid. The man smiled and turned and walked deeper into the bathroom. He was see-through, but had mass, almost two-dimensional. It was amazing in retrospect. I recalled pulling her arm and saying, "Mama, Mama," and asked who the man was. She was clueless. The next occurrence happened when I was 15 during my 8th to 9th grade year of summer reading. To preface this, I had a cat named Fluffy, who was the best friend until age 11. When she died, my evil neighbour poisoned her. Her death took something from me. I know it sounds crazy, but I truly loved her. Well, this particular day, my twin brother, my sister and myself were on our deck reading our book, when my sister says, "Do you see a cat in the window?" I hadn't seen a cat in years. I look in the window to the 2nd floor, and there is a cat at the window. However, the cat was grey and see-through. I could see the plant behind the cat in the window. Fluffy was grey as well, and what truly caught my attention were the eyes. The eyes were a very bright yellow within this grey apparition, just like hers had been in life. And around those yellow eyes, as I maintained eye contact for at least 15 minutes, which felt more like an hour. Now let me remind you, I loved her truly. I would spend hours with her after school. I didn't get over her death for a long time. I think seeing her was her way of letting us know that she still watches over us. Thinking about this, it's on the 2nd floor, almost as if she's looking over us, like from a higher place. Saying this is a bit emotional for me. I looked back up and she was gone. I felt like I had woken up from a dream. And to add to this, many years after, my sister and I shared a dream where my deceased German Shepherd Hannah was chasing Fluffy as they did in life, but didn't catch her. My sister's dream was in our home, where Hannah was chasing her, but couldn't get her. This home was at the bottom of our hill that we lived, and by the end of the dream, My sister said Hannah and Fluffy were walking up the hill together side by side, as if Fluffy were bringing Hannah over to the other side. My dream. I woke up on an oversized mattress outside at the top of our hill. The ambient lighting was hues not on this earth. I remember awakening, getting off the bed and seeing Fluffy halfway down the hill. I remember squatting down to say hello to her and pet her as I did in life, but I didn't see Hannah. And then I woke, and it was as if she finally passed. I told my mother the dream, to which she said my sister had a dream that was comparable to my own. I asked my sister, as this was where I got the information. I never saw her or dreamed of her again, and I wonder if there may be something beyond. I struggle with this myself. Maybe the experience will offer consolation to some. In the summer of 2007, I was visiting my boyfriend Angelo in Adelaide. We'd gone to Port Elliot one day and decided to book a room and stay overnight at the Royal Family Hotel. The building was definitely old, and we opted for the basics, with no ensuite bathroom. It was comfortable and charming, with a great band playing that night, and we had an excellent time. Of course, that was weird. What was weird was that when we checked in that afternoon, we were given our keys and put all of our things in the room. I told Angelo I was going to pay a visit to the restroom, and Angelo waited outside on the second floor balcony whilst I went to the ladies' room. I still had the room key with me, and I'd left my bag in the room, so when I stepped into the bathroom stall, I made it a point to try and hang the key up on the peg on the inside of the stall door. The ring was too small to hang on the peg, so I carefully positioned it with the oversized plastic tag on one side of the door. It was a bit of a chore actually to balance it just right without it falling, but I finally got it to stay. I did what I had to do and collected myself, and then reached for the key. And it was gone. I knew for sure with no doubt that I put the key there, and that I would have heard it fall if it had fallen onto the ceramic floor tiles. No one could miss that. I was the only person in there, as a woman had left the next stall for me in order for me to go in, as there was a woman who had left the stall next to me, washed up and gone. I'd heard the keys rattling, but I assumed it was her keys. I looked all over the bathroom, even going as far as glancing into the toilet. They were way too big to be flushed down, I thought, and I knew I was losing my mind or something. Of course, I'm dreading telling Angelo that I had the keys a whole 10 minutes and lost them. Not trying to mention having to ask for another room key from the hotel manager, I told the manager maybe there'd been some mix-up with the keys, and I took them. I told the manager maybe someone had mixed them up with their keys and taken them, because I really thought he'd think I was crackers. Angelo was amazed I could lose them so fast, and I thought I'd surely heard his thoughts on that, and as I did, rest assured, it occurred to me that being an old hotel, perhaps we had some playful ghosts. I'm an intuitive empath, so when I heard my inner voice telling me I should check the bathroom again, I decided to give it a try. I came out of there with keys in hand. They were positioned in the very same place and in the very same way I'd put them. I mean, in exactly the same position in the stall I had placed them in. I don't know how that happened. No one could have known that they were like that but me, and no one could have taken them whilst I'd been in the stall. Angelo and I were both a little freaked out about it, and we walked down to the pub. As we were doing so, we passed an employee who was coming up. I stopped her and asked, "Do you have ghosts by any chance?" expecting to hear a giggle and a polite no, with a shaken head. But to my surprise, she said, "Yes, we do actually. A little girl and a little boy." I asked if perhaps they liked playing tricks on the guests, and she said that they did. So, if you decide to stay in this haunted hotel, watch your keys. And if something comes up missing, most likely the children will return it to you if you walk away and come back. Who knows with these playful little imps. This happened a few years ago when I was in grade school. It was the middle of winter, and my boyfriend and I decided we were going to go pick up a couple of friends and drive out of town and go get baked. We drove around 15 minutes away from the town to an area near the lake and found a good area to spark up. We were a little ways into the woods where nobody could see the lights from the truck. That way, we could leave the truck running and get warm. We proceeded to load the bong and take a few smokes before heading back into town to grab some munchies. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. What the hell were you doing driving out of town to smoke weed? Well, I live in a town, a very small town mind you, in Alberta, Canada, and we were a bunch of paranoid teenagers who did not want to get caught smoking weed, and we drove back to town. We were heading to McDonald's, which is in the opposite end of town from where we drove in. We drove off the main road and down a couple of streets towards the trucker's route to McDonald's. But something super weird happened on one of those roads. I can absolutely say that we had had nothing to do with the fact that we were all baked, because we all saw the same thing and freaked the hell out. So my boyfriend turned onto this road, and as I looked out the passenger side window, I noticed this guy walking on the sidewalk in the opposite direction we were heading. He wore a black hoodie and a pair of jeans, but no jacket. And let me tell you that midwinter in Alberta is absolutely freezing. On this night, it was about -23 Celsius and snowing pretty damn good. This guy was not dressed for the weather at all. But then again, a lot of people around here are either too stupid to dress for the weather or too poor to afford it, so I didn't think anything of it at first. We were driving a bit slower due to road conditions, but not by much, and we were getting closer to passing the guy on the sidewalk, when suddenly he turned towards the road in the direction of the truck and started to speed up. I screamed at my boyfriend to watch out and avoid the guy, but before I could finish my sentence, he ran in front of the passenger side of the truck. However, where we should have heard and felt the impact of his body from when he threw himself against the truck, there was nothing. No sound, no impact, and when we looked to check if he was okay, he was gone. When I say gone, I mean non-existent. There were no footprints leading to the truck, and there was no body, and it was as if he'd just vanished into thin air. Now, if you're still under the impression that we were just baked, think about how multiple people saw the same apparition and the exact same thing. That can't be explained away just by being a little high. I looked back at everyone and asked them if they'd all seen what happened, and everyone nodded their heads in disbelief. I told my boyfriend to drive away, and that's when everyone began freaking out. Like this experience wasn't freaking enough, the fact that we were all high made it even worse. But it was not a trick of the mind. We never did get our munchies, but we all decided it would be best if we just went home instead. Obviously, I never found out who the guy was, because he vanished, where he went, or if he was even real. But I just hope I don't have an experience like that again. When I was 16, Back in 2012, my parents had already separated, and I was living with my mum and my late brother's son in my mother's house. My mum and dad at the time were on an on and off basis, and one particular night, my mum went to visit my dad for the weekend. My cousin and her 2 kids came over to keep me and my nephew company. We live in a township in South Africa, and our house was a 4-roomed brick house. You would enter first through the back door and into the kitchen. Then the sitting room is to your left and the bathroom is to your right. My room was on the left, next to the sitting room, and facing the bathroom, and my mum's room was straight ahead facing the kitchen and hallway. Now, on the weekend my mum left, my cousin and her 2 kids were sleeping in my room, whilst me and my nephew slept in my mum's room. We would turn off all the lights in the house, except the kitchen light, so the reflections could be seen from the hallway and entering straight ahead in my mum's room. We were a family of prayer, and every night at midnight we would pray with candles placed on the floor of the hallway, and we would not put them out for the rest of the night. It was a night like no other, and me and my cousin had just finished our prayers. We went to bed in separate rooms, but somehow I felt like I was seeing things. It was at that moment when you're just about to doze off, but you're still aware of your surroundings. Now, I've always seen things like shadow people around these moments of consciousness, especially in my brother's room. It was my late brother's room before, but my mum said I could use it as my own after his death. Now, it has never been the same since. Or maybe I was just overreacting and missing my brother. But it became much colder than the other rooms in the house, regardless of the weather. Sometimes I would see a crowd of people's shadows at my window, and on other nights, I would feel someone sitting on top of me as I slept and be completely unable to move. This night was different. It felt real, like I was asleep but I could still see my surroundings. The light emanating from the kitchen reaches my mum's room, door and wardrobe, and in that light I can see the shadow of a man in a suit entering the room. As his shadow grows bigger, swallowing the light from the hallway and falling onto the wardrobe. I was so scared that I couldn't scream for my cousin in the next room. I finally woke up and got up and went to tell my cousin what happened. She told me to say the Lord's Prayer and to go back to sleep. I did as I was told, but I could not remember the words to the prayer. I told her this, and she came into my mum's room and helped me pray and rebuke whatever it was I saw. The words slowly came back to me and I could fall asleep again. It's safe to say, I never saw whatever that was again. I was in a pretty good relationship with a girl that I didn't know had a drinking problem, but she was sober while I was with her. We lived far apart, but I was enjoying my time with her, so I moved to be closer to her. I guess that was too much. She completely cut contacts with me, with no explanation, which was obviously upsetting and confusing. She didn't answer my calls, and her roommates told me to piss off when I went to her place. I gave her more space than I really wanted to, and tried to communicate with her again for months. She agreed to let me meet with her a couple of times, but then cancelled. Then she sent me an email, accusing me of all sorts of terrible things. I definitely would have preferred to discuss those issues in person, but having been hurt and confused and incommunicado for so long, I responded immediately with an angry message. She removed her initial insults and forwarded an edited version of my email to all our mutual friends with a message about how I was threatening her. Okay, message received. Bitches be crazy. Time to move on. About a month later, a detective knocks on my door investigating an abuse claim. Supposedly, I'm threatening to kill her. I give an official statement of my version and tell them truthfully that she's moved and I made no effort to discover her new address or phone number, and that I have no contact with her and no intentions of making contact with her, and that I never made any of the threats she claimed. They encouraged me to file a countersuit, and I'm like, are you kidding? I have a new girlfriend already, I just want to move on. She needs help that I obviously can't provide, and tells people she had a restraining order against me, which isn't true, but I let it go. So anyway, time to forget and move on, right? About a year later, I get invited to the birthday party of a dear friend, who also invited the crazy ex. I didn't know this, but the crazy ex is in the kitchen making pasta when I arrive with my new girlfriend. The crazy ex throws boiling hot pasta and boiling water at the birthday girl, and thankfully it misses. She storms out the back door, and she's not over it, I guess. The funny thing is, I was always good to her, and even on this occasion I tried to be nice to her, and tried talking with her about it, but she lost it. I literally did nothing to her. A few months after, I see her on the street with her new boyfriend. She sees me and I get a look of pure hatred. She immediately crosses the street to avoid walking past me, actually shoving her confused-looking boyfriend into moving traffic. I felt really sorry for him. I don't think he stuck around that long. About a year after that, I get curious about her and wonder if she's in the paper on murder charges, and Google her name. I find a beautiful song she wrote and filmed and uploaded to YouTube with a few views about being crazy and throwing away her relationships. I'm moved to tears and write her a short message, but of course I never hear back. I think it must be incredibly tiring being so crazy. I am a 20-year-old male living in the Deep South. I am now a functional, medicated, and therapy-attending paranoid schizophrenic. However, I wasn't always this way, and this story comes from a time before I even knew what was wrong. It was around April 2017. I had just come out of a painful divorce, and she had taken all of my friends away from me in the process. I was obviously trying to reach out to anyone I could, but I had severe codependency issues that I didn't know how to address. Anyway, I found myself wandering the games section of my local Walmart, as I still am a gamer at heart, and had to see what was available. Things were going alright, and I seemed to be in control of myself. Then he appeared. This poor unsuspecting soul started talking to me about the World of Warcraft, which I happened to play. I perked up at this point, thinking I could make a friend, a new friend, that had not been taken away from me. We made casual jokes and talked about the new expansion. At this point, his mother, as he was probably 18 to 20 judging by his appearance, came and took him to another aisle. He didn't say goodbye, he just walked off, and like that, our conversation was through. Well, in my mind, we had made a connection. We had bonded. In my sick, twisted state, I thought he would appreciate it if we hung out for a while. So I followed him. I made a point to casually stroll down the aisles that he happened to visit, and striked up a conversation with him about different things, jokes and such. I can't remember. I could tell he was getting creeped out by the third time I did this. He started getting this deer in headlights look every time he saw me, and it was starting to become a horror story, though in my eyes, it was perfectly normal. At some point, his fight or flight must have kicked in, because when I appeared, as soon as I opened my mouth to speak, he screamed, "Leave me alone!" and stormed off, dragging his mother as quickly as he possibly could. This was a wake-up call for me, that I was being severely creepy, and also a stalker. I realized that this could very well be the behavior that caused my divorce in the first place. I checked myself in to a mental institution after that, and got the help I needed. I am now significantly better, and my relationships with people have greatly improved. I now have good friends and a loving fiancé. Not all creepers mean to be creepy. Some of us just need the proper psychiatric help. On behalf of all the unknowing and good-intended creepers out there, I humbly and sincerely apologize for our behavior. It doesn't make it forgivable, but I hope it does give you some context as to what goes on in the mind of a creeper. Thank you for your time. To start off, I had a great uncle who died from a heart attack while sleeping a couple of months before, and I hadn't known about it yet. I was about 3 years old and alone inside the living room of my grandma's house. The time was 5:38 a.m. when it happened in the room, and I had been playing with the Jack-in-the-Box. The windowsill had a couple of stuffed animals on it from my grandma's collection. 1 tiger, 2 bunnies, and a turtle. The rug was made of long, soft fabric, and there were 2 reclining chairs and a couch on the right side of the room. On the left was a big old TV. My dad's NES and Super Nintendo were plugged in because he was teaching me how to play video games an hour or 2 earlier. In the back of the room were my aunt's porcelain doll collection and a large glass cabinet. There were 13 dolls inside. At the time, it was raining outside, and my dad was drinking a can of beer. The room had a few cobwebs here and there, but the only spiders actually around were Daddy Longlegs. The rain was pouring down on the small house we were in. Snow was very little, but a couple of splotches were around. We never really got much snow in that house. My aunt started to cook dinner with my grandmother, and they were making bacon and eggs for dinner, because it was mine and my dad's favourite. Also, there were 3 model cars, 1 red, 1 blue, 1 black. My dad had just bought me them, and they were still in the box. They were all around the table between the 2 recliners. The light was dimming, because it was going out, and this house is built in the woods, so we were around very few other houses. The house was surrounded by gravel, and around that grass, with about 17 or so trees. The painting was of a mountain and a wolf pack howling. My dad and grandma came in. Apparently, I had told them that my great uncle was talking with me, and with some other people, and he said to come into the hole with him, and I said no. My grandma asked, "Where's the hole?" and I pointed towards a painting on my grandma's wall. There was a hole my grandma put in the hole years ago. You see, there was a hole behind the painting. The only people who knew about it were my grandma and my aunt. You see, they made a hole there for kittens to climb in, and of course when they stopped using it, they covered it up with the painting. My grandma went pale and moved the painting. The hole was of course still there. I always thought it was how clever I was, until my family enlightened me, and told me it was because only one other person knew about that hole, and that person was my dead uncle. I met a guy when I was 18 and fell in love fast and hard. We dated, moved in together, got engaged, and eventually got married. But every time we took a step forward into our relationship, he got a little bit meaner. However, it was just enough to make me think that perhaps I was being a bit too overly sensitive. So I brushed it off. It'd be little things, like he'd yell over dumb stuff, or start hitting the walls when I made him mad, or fight me on really small things. He'd also become a lot rougher when we would play around, to the point where he once actually pinned me down and tried to suffocate me with a pillow. I was young, dumb, and in love, and believed him when he said he was sorry and that he was just messing around. His drinking also picked up quite a bit. He got angry when I said anything, so I held my tongue. On Christmas Eve 2011, he drank so much that he passed out in his mum's foyer. I spent the night cleaning up his puke so that he wouldn't drown his face in it, and dodging his fists whenever he realized I was nearby. I cried as he said some of the worst things he'd ever said to me, but I stayed because we hadn't been married all that long. Fast forward to my 26th birthday party in January 2012. We went out with some friends and had a great night. That is until someone asked me a question about sports. I don't really pay attention to them, but my husband started screaming at me for being a fat, ignorant bitch because I didn't remember the score when the Giants won the World Series. Seriously. On the way home, he brought it up again. Then, in a fit of rage, swerved our car into oncoming traffic. Luckily, I pulled the wheel back in time so that we weren't hit, and it was a close one, and I did my best to calm him down. When we got home, he was still furious and began throwing things and screaming at me. He opened the knife drawer, and I booked it upstairs and locked myself in the guest bedroom. After 15 minutes of pounding and kicking on the door, he gave up and drank until he passed out. Over the course of the next 5 days, my friends came over to help me move out while he was at work. I filed for a divorce, and the twat had fought me every single step. I'm still waiting for the divorce to be finalized, but now I have an attorney to do my fighting for me. Douche. Bonus story. So, I like to think of myself as a funny guy, as I'm sure the majority of people I've met would completely disagree, but I deserve gold stars for my persistence if nothing else. Besides, haters gonna hate. And just as those haters will hate, so too will airport security take any half-assed terrorism jokes extremely seriously. For the past few days, I've been on a lovely business trip, and part of the trip involved orchestrating a photo shoot. That meant I had all my camera equipment with me, which I'd packed away into a travel case and checked in as hold luggage as I prepared to catch my flight back. As I was going through the usual border checks, I had a member of airport staff who seemed to be a bit of a joker. When I asked if I needed to remove my shoes before going through the scanner, as I've yet to experience any airport that consistently asks either way, the member of staff joked, saying, "Nah, you can leave them on. I already know you're a terrorist anyway." I was temporarily stunned by the joke, but being a scrawny, nerdy white male, and not really the prime candidate for any terror organization, I returned the joke, saying, "Ah, damn, you got me. Lucky I already checked in my hold luggage, eh?" Now, at 24, I really should know better. But I really don't. And I really shouldn't have returned the joke. This comment was overheard by airport security, who took me to the side and started asking questions and asked for my boarding pass, as well as my baggage claim receipt. They then took me to a side room. This was particularly awkward, as I wasn't allowed to put my previously removed belongings on, and I quite really needed that belt. So I had to scurry along, security in tow, while holding up my trousers to prevent adding indecent exposure to the list of offences. In this room, they asked me about the exchange, where I was going, where I came from. They also removed my hold luggage from the flight, believing it contained explosives or the like. At this time, I didn't there believe to be too much danger. It was a joke that I reciprocated. So once they assessed the luggage, I should be fine, right? Wrong. Well, apparently, the reflectors I'd bought to the photo shoot didn't show up too well in the scanner. Apparently, the staff scanning the case believed it to be some sort of wire-based contraption. Oh boy, I thought. The damn Joker member of staff really screwed me on this one. There was a lot of back and forth explaining, and to streamline the event, I eventually explained to them that I was doing a photo shoot and that it was a reflector. I showed them the camera in my carry-on luggage and also the shoot plan I made. Eventually, they let me go after my planned flight, and thus my colleagues had departed. So I had to purchase another flight at my expense, and am now going through the process again. Except this time, I'm not going to joke about terrorism, though I might headbutt that scanner guy if I'm allocated that bay again. However, it wasn't as lucky as another story I heard, about a director who was flying from Los Angeles to New York to create the first episode of a TV program to try and sell it for production. I was told to imagine the scene when security asked him why he was going to New York, and he said, "I'm going there to shoot a pilot." Just think about how bad that sounds.